The wind howled low across the Montana plains that morning, rattling loose boards and lifting fine dust into the air like whispered secrets. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Calder Briggs, a widowed rancher with too much land and too little company, stepped out of his cabin to begin the day. He didn't expect anything different, just another morning of feeding stock, mending fences, and keeping to himself. He liked it that way. Quiet, predictable. Since his wife passed 3 winters ago, he'd gotten used to silence. It didn't ask questions. It didn't hurt. But everything changed when he opened the barn. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a figure curled up in the hay, still as stone. His heart jumped. Cattle thieves? A trespasser? His hand went to the old Winchester he kept near the door. But as he stepped closer, the figure shifted. Barely. It was a woman. No, a girl, really. Young, wrapped in an oversized coat that didn't belong to her. Her hair was tangled, face smudged with dirt. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. But the thing that froze him in place, what made his breath catch, was the tag around her neck. A thick piece of card looped on twine with one thing written in bold black ink. She stirred when he knelt beside her, eyelids fluttering, breath shallow. "Easy now," Calder said, his voice low but firm. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." She flinched at first, then looked up. Her eyes, dark, scared, but sharp, met his. And in that moment something shifted in him, like a door opening that had been locked for years. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Her lips moved dry and slow. "Don't know if it's mine anymore." He blinked, taken aback. "Well, that ain't right." She blinked slowly, eyes closing again from exhaustion. He didn't ask any more questions, not then. He scooped her up gently, like he would a wounded foal, and carried her into the warmth of the house. Later, as he lit the stove and wrapped her in blankets, Calder kept glancing at the tag he had taken off her neck and laid on the table. $1. Someone had put a price on her, and whoever did was going to regret it. She slept for almost 2 days. Calder kept the fire going, ladled broth into her mouth when she could swallow, and set a chair near the bed where he could keep watch. The tag sat untouched on the mantel, its black letters still haunting. He didn't know what troubled him more, the fact that someone had tried to sell a human being, or that they'd valued her so little. When she finally stirred again, her voice was stronger, though still laced with weariness. "Where am I?" "Briggs Ranch," Calder replied. "Outside Calhoun, about half a day's ride from town." She blinked, trying to sit up. "Careful," he said, reaching to steady her. "You're safe now. But you were near starved when I found you." Her eyes drifted to the mantel. "The tag, I took it off you." "They left it on me to scare the others, to prove I wasn't worth saving." Calder's jaw clenched. They were wrong. By the next morning, she was eating small meals and moving slowly through the house. She refused to rest long despite her obvious weakness. "I ain't made to lie still," she muttered. "What's your name?" Calder asked, not for the first time. She hesitated, eyes on the floor. "People used to call me Josie before." "Before what?" She looked up, voice flat. "Before I was sold." That night, Calder stood outside the house, the cool air brushing his face, fists in his coat pockets. "Josie!" She didn't say who had taken her, or how. But the pain in her voice said enough. She'd been passed between hands like a burden, or worse, and he couldn't ignore it. Over the following days, Josie began to reclaim pieces of herself. She washed her hair in the creek out back, brushed the horses with gentle care, sat on the porch with a cup of tea Calder had brewed too strong. She never smiled, not yet, but she stopped flinching when he walked into her room. One evening, Calder handed her a folded pair of boots. "They're worn," he said, "but better than bare feet." She looked down at her toes, then back up at him. "No one's ever handed me something without expecting something back." Calder met her gaze. "I ain't no one." She didn't answer. But that night, she left the bedroom door open a few inches. It wasn't much, but it meant she was starting to believe him. The town of Calhoun was little more than a main street, a saloon, a general store, and a church that doubled as a town hall. Calder didn't go often, just when he needed supplies or to check in with the sheriff. He preferred the solitude of his land and the honesty of animals. But now, with Josie in his care, he needed answers. She wouldn't tell him who had sold her. Not yet. But the pain in her eyes and the scars on her wrists spoke volumes. So Calder rode into town. Sheriff Tom Ballard was sipping coffee outside his office when Calder rode up. A friend of Calder's late father, the sheriff was a fair man, though not always a fast one. "You're looking serious," Ballard said, eyeing him over the rim of his mug. Calder tied off his horse. "Found a girl in my barn, young, hurt, nearly starved. Ballard stood up straight. Who? Says her name's Josie. Woke up with a tag on her neck. $1. The sheriff swore softly under his breath. That kind of evil don't belong out here. I need to know who's behind it. Ballard nodded slowly. You may not like the answer. Back at the ranch, Josie stood near the corral watching the horses. One mare in particular, pale gray and skittish, mirrored her mood. Tense, quiet, suspicious of the world. She held out a handful of oats. The mare didn't come close. Don't blame you, Josie whispered. That evening Calder returned with a name. Gideon Rusk, a trader. Known for moving goods and people without asking too many questions. He worked under different aliases and never stayed in one place long. Rumor had it he'd passed through Calhoun a few weeks back with a wagon full of indentured workers. I ain't sure where he's headed now, Sheriff Ballard had said. But if the girl remembers anything, even a sound or a mark on a wagon, let me know. Calder didn't bring it up immediately. Instead, he handed Josie a tin cup of warm cider and sat beside her on the porch. Do you remember a name? He asked gently. Anything? She shook her head. They didn't use names, just numbers, orders. Sometimes I heard the men call each other by code names, but nothing real. Calder stared out at the darkening sky. We'll find him. We'll stop it. Josie's voice was barely a whisper. Why do you care? He turned to her. Because no one did when it should have mattered. I won't be one more man who looks away. She didn't cry, but she looked at him then. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but with the first glimmer of trust. And Calder knew something had changed. He wasn't just helping a lost girl. He was learning how to feel alive again. The first time Josie laughed, it startled them both. It was a quiet afternoon. Calder had taken her into town for supplies. Her first time stepping off the ranch since the day she arrived. She wore a borrowed shawl and an old dress of his late wife's, taken in with safety pins and grace. She moved carefully, eyes always scanning for danger, but she didn't shy away from the world anymore. Not completely. At the general store, while Calder haggled over feed prices, Josie wandered past a crate of chicks near the counter. One of them escaped its box, flapping awkwardly across the floor. She reached down to scoop it up, and the fluffy thing squawked indignantly, nipping her finger. She giggled. Light, pure. Calder turned just in time to see it. It knocked the wind out of him. He hadn't heard laughter like that in years. Not in his house, not from someone who'd known pain. It was the sound of hope, alive and untamed. Josie caught him watching and flushed. Sorry, don't be, he said softly. I'd give anything to hear that again. They rode home in near silence, but it was a comfortable one. The kind that said the worst of the storm had passed, and though the damage was still visible, the roof was holding. That night, she helped prepare supper. Nothing fancy, just biscuits and beans, but she did it with sleeves rolled up and hands steady. Calder watched her set the table, then pour 2 mugs of tea. She glanced up. What? He shook his head. You're different. Josie raised an eyebrow. Then what? Then the girl who came out of my barn with hay in her hair and a price around her neck. Her smile was small, but it stayed. Later they sat on the porch as the wind stirred the grass. The stars were beginning to pierce through the sky when Josie spoke. I remember a song, she said suddenly. My mama used to hum it. Calder waited. Josie began to sing. Quietly. Just a few lines. Her voice was husky, uncertain, but it cracked something open in the space between them. When she stopped, Calder asked, What happened to her? Josie swallowed. Gone, years ago, after she passed. That's when everything fell apart. Calder didn't ask for more. He simply said, You are not alone anymore. She didn't reply. But that night, she left her door open again, just a little wider than before. The next day, the sky threatened rain. Dark clouds rolled over the hills like cattle with bad intent, and Calder worked quickly to bring the animals into shelter. Josie helped, moving with more confidence now. Boots in the mud, braids swinging behind her, eyes focused. She still didn't smile often, but something in her posture had changed. She stood straighter, spoke more, asked questions about the ranch, about crops, weather, horses. Calder answered every one. Sometimes he caught himself watching her. Not in the way a man watches something delicate or temporary, but in the quiet way one might watch a fire warming a long, cold room. That evening, with the storm tapping against the windows, Josie sat by the fireplace holding the small knife Calder had given her. It's not just for cutting apples, he'd said when he handed it to her. It's for anything you need it to be. She looked at it now like a symbol more than a tool. I think I want to learn to ride, she said suddenly. Calder looked up from his chair. You ever been on a horse before? She shook her head. I wasn't allowed. He nodded slowly. Then we'll fix that. The next morning, the rain had passed, leaving the earth rich and dark. Calder saddled his gentlest mare, Maybelle, old but steady, and led her out into the corral. Josie waited by the fence, face tight with nerves but jaw set. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm tired of being afraid." With his help, she mounted slowly, hands white-knuckled. He walked her in slow circles at first, holding the reins until she found her balance. "Lean with her," he instructed. "Let her carry you." "She's stronger than I thought," Josie murmured. "So are you." She looked down at him. For the first time since she arrived, she let herself smile, and it reached her eyes. That night, Calder found the $1 tag again. He hadn't thrown it out, couldn't. He sat with it at the table, rubbing a thumb over the ink until it blurred slightly. Josie came in quietly behind him. "You kept it?" she asked. "I didn't want to," he said. "But I didn't want to forget either." Josie stared at it for a moment, then reached out, took it from his hands, and placed it into the fire. They both watched it curl and turn to ash. "That part of me is gone," she said, "and I'm not letting it come back." Calder looked at her with something new in his chest, something that didn't feel like guilt or duty anymore. It felt like hope. The weeks that followed settled into something neither of them expected. Peace. Josie rose early, sometimes before Calder, and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, as he jokingly claimed. She learned to gather eggs without startling the hens, how to mend a fence without splinters, and how to ride Maybelle in wide circles through the pasture without fear tightening her spine. And Calder? He found himself smiling often. It had been so long since his cabin felt like a home, since laughter bounced off those old wooden beams, since anyone sat across the table from him without needing to be fed or fixed. With Josie, things didn't feel broken anymore. They felt beginning. One chilly morning, as they sat on the porch sharing warm bread and honey, Josie asked, "Do you ever go into town just to talk?" Calder raised an eyebrow. "Talk?" She smirked. "You know, visit people, see friends." He took a sip of coffee. "Can't say I've tried that in a while." Josie's expression turned soft. "You should. Maybe I should too." Calder tilted his head. "Thinking of going somewhere?" She looked out toward the hills. "Not yet, but someday maybe. I want to help girls like me. Ones that ain't found barns to fall asleep in. Yet." His heart caught at that word yet, like Hope had a map and she was drawing it. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from Elmswood, a town 2 days' ride west. Calder recognized the name written in rushed handwriting. Miriam Dawes, his wife's cousin. He hadn't heard from her in over a year. The letter was short, urgent. "Missing girls here. Not the first. The sheriff does nothing. They're being taken. I remember what your father did during the war, Calder. You still that kind of man?" He folded the letter slowly. Josie saw the look in his eyes as he came inside. "Something wrong?" she asked. Calder hesitated, then handed her the note. She read it once, then again. And when she looked up, there was no fear, only fire. "How soon can we leave?" she asked. They packed that night, not just with supplies, but with something more. Purpose. Calder checked his rifle. Josie checked her boots. This wasn't running. This was rising. The barn where she had once hidden had become her launching point. And now, side by side with the man who gave her back her name, Josie was ready to fight for every girl who hadn't found her barn yet. The road to Elmswood was long and lonely. Dust trailed behind them as Calder and Josie rode west, 2 horses moving in rhythm under the early autumn sky. Neither spoke much during the first day's ride. There was too much to hold in their minds, too many questions waiting at the end of the trail. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. They had come to understand each other without needing many words. Where Josie once flinched at every snapping branch, now she rode steady. Where Calder once guarded every emotion, now he glanced at her often, with quiet reassurance. As the sun began to dip below the hills, they made camp beneath a stand of tall pines. Josie stirred the pot of beans over the fire while Calder checked the perimeter, eyes trained like a soldier who'd never fully left the war behind. When he sat beside her again, she asked, "You knew Miriam well?" "She and my wife were close. After Cora died, we drifted. Her letter. First I've heard from her since." Josie stared into this fire. "You think it's the same people? The ones who took me?" Calder's voice was steady. "If it's not the same hands, it's the same sickness. Either way, we don't ride past it." They reached Elmswood by midday on the 3rd day. It was larger than Calhoun. A rail station on the edge, a church steeple in the center, and the smell of sawdust and coal lingering in the wind. It looked normal, on the surface. But Willa could feel it. Something wasn't right. People walked quickly, eyes averted. Posters covered the sheriff's office wall. Missing girls. Too many. Too recent. They found Miriam at the boarding house she ran near the mill. Her hair was more silver than Calder remembered, but her voice still carried the same spark. She embraced him tight, tears shining in her eyes. Then she turned to Josie. "You're the one he brought with him." Josie nodded. "You're not just surviving, are you?" Miriam said, searching her face. "You're fighting." Josie smiled faintly, trying to. That evening, the three of them sat around a small table with a stack of reports, newspaper clippings, and quiet fury. "They say it's runaways," Miriam said, her voice tight. "Drifters. Girls no one claims. But it's a lie. Some of them were working at the station, others in homes." "Pattern?" Calder asked. "Most were last seen around the rail yard, or after talking with a man named Rennick Shaw." Josie stiffened. "I've heard that name." Calder looked at her sharply. "Where?" "In a wagon," she said quietly. "The men who moved us. They talked about Shaw's roots. Said he got special payment from somewhere east." Miriam's face darkened. "That's him. Always walking just outside the law." Calder stood. "Then we go to the yard tomorrow." Josie nodded. "But not as ourselves." The next morning, Josie wore a dress too plain for a visitor, her hair tucked into a bonnet. She walked the yard with eyes downcast, watching. Calder followed at a distance. And there he was, a tall man with a coat too nice for the dust, tipping his hat at every girl under 20. Hands too familiar, smile too sharp. Rennick Shaw. Josie's stomach turned, but she didn't flinch, because this time she wasn't alone. Josie kept her steps slow, and her head low as she moved through the rail yard. She didn't look at Rennick Shaw directly. She didn't need to. She could feel his presence, too smooth, too casual, as he hovered near a stack of crates and offered friendly advice to a girl no older than 15. His smile never reached his eyes. His hand rested too easily on the girl's shoulder. Calder watched from the platform nearby, one hand on the rifle slung across his back. He stood among freight workers and traders, blending in like another rancher passing through. Josie stepped closer. The girl Shaw was speaking to looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. Shaw was pointing toward a wagon with a soft canvas top parked behind the station. "And the ride's easy," he said. "Just help unload in Fairbank, then come back with a little coin in your pocket. Simple work." Josie moved closer, deliberate. "You offering jobs?" she asked, loud enough to interrupt. Shaw turned, gaze sliding over her. "You looking for one?" Josie gave a practiced shrug. "I'm looking for anything that pays." He eyed her carefully, his smile returning. "You travel light?" "Light as they come." He stepped closer. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Called me Rose." From the edge of the platform, Calder saw it all. Saw Shaw tilt his head, nod toward the wagon. Saw Josie stiffen. Just barely, but she held the act. "Head around back," Shaw said. "We'll get you started." That was the cue. Josie moved slowly toward the wagon where two men waited. One held a ledger, the other a rope. She stopped just short and said, "Funny kind of interview, isn't it?" The ledger man frowned. "Beg pardon?" "You don't ask where I'm from, what I can do?" The other man grunted. "Don't need to." That was all Calder needed to hear. He stepped off the platform like thunder walking, rifle in hand, voice sharp. "She's not going anywhere." Shaw turned, mouth twisted. "Who the hell?" But before he could finish, Miriam appeared behind him, holding a folded piece of paper. "A sworn affidavit," she said loudly, "signed by the sheriff in Calhoun, naming Josie as a witness to human trafficking. Copies sent to the federal circuit judge." Gasps spread through the crowd. Railroad men paused, eyebrows raised. Shaw laughed, sharp, brittle. "This is slander." "It's truth," Josie said, stepping beside Calder. "And I'd swear it again in court." For a moment, no one moved. Then the man with the rope lunged forward. Calder raised his rifle, not to fire, but to signal he wouldn't hesitate. "Try it," he warned. The man stopped cold. And then from behind the freight cars, Sheriff Ballard stepped out, badge visible, revolver drawn. "We got a train headed east, Shaw," he called, "and this time you're riding it in irons." By sundown, Shaw and his men were in custody. The girl they had targeted was safe. The rail yard had gone quiet. And Josie, heart pounding, shoulders shaking, stood beside Calder as the last light bled from the sky. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she whispered, "but I will be." He nodded once, proud. "You didn't just survive him," he said. "You beat him." Josie turned to him, tears shining. "And I'll keep doing it, for every girl he would have found next." That night, in a quiet room above Miriam's boarding house, Josie finally allowed herself to cry. Not from fear, not from loss, but from release. The next morning, Elmswood woke up different. Rennick Shaw's name had passed through the town like wildfire for years, always just beyond reach, always working the shadows. But now, he was gone, cuffed, on a train east under federal escort. People stared when Josie and Calder walked through the square. Not out of judgment, but out of recognition. Josie wasn't just another runaway anymore. She was the girl who spoke, the one who said no, the one who brought justice. Miriam poured coffee in her kitchen while sunlight warmed the worn wood floors. "They'll keep coming, you know," she said. "The girls, the ones who escaped but don't know where to land." Josie nodded. "Then we build something for them." Calder glanced up from the letter he'd been reading. "What are you thinking?" Josie breathed deep. "Something like what you gave me. A place to feel safe. Not a boarding house, not a shelter. A home." Miriam smiled. "With a name?" Josie looked down at her hands. Scarred. Healing. Strong. "I want to call it the Dollar House." Calder blinked. "After the tag?" She nodded. "To remind them, and me, that we're worth more than what anyone ever wrote on a price." The idea grew like wildfire. Miriam offered her old barn. Calder promised to help build. And word spread fast. Too fast for Josie to control. Within a week, 2 girls arrived from a mining camp up north. Then another came by train. They were tired, hungry, too quiet. But they stayed, because Josie was there to meet them, because the Dollar House had open arms, not questions. One afternoon, Josie stood beneath the cottonwood tree outside the barn. Calder came up behind her, quiet as always. "You still sure about this?" he asked. Josie smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." "You'll be needed by more people than you'll ever have room for. Then we grow." He nodded, then handed her something. A wooden sign carved by hand. "The Dollar House for every girl who was ever told she wasn't worth it." Josie held it to her chest like it was sacred. "Thank you," she whispered. Calder looked away, then back at her. "I should have built it sooner." Josie shook her head gently. "You built me first. The house came after." That night they hung the sign together. And when the wind blew through the eaves and the stars blinked to life, the Dollar House stood like a promise kept. By winter's edge, the Dollar House was full. 12 beds, 2 stoves, one long table where stories were whispered and names spoken aloud for the first time in years. The girls, ranging from barely teenagers to young women, came from every kind of silence. Some rode wagons alone, others were dropped off at night by people too ashamed to stay. But when they stepped through the door, they were no longer lost, because Josie was there. She greeted each one the same way Calder once greeted her, without fear, without pity, just steady presence. Calder split his time between the ranch and the house. He mended boots, taught the older girls how to ride, and kept a quiet watch when newcomers paced the porch in the dark. He didn't say much, but his presence had weight, like a gate that would never fail. Josie admired him more every day, not just for what he did, but for what he never asked for in return. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Josie sat beside Calder on the back steps. Snow dusted the roof, moonlight settling across the field in silver. "Why haven't you ever remarried?" she asked softly. Calder didn't look at her. "Didn't feel right after Cora. Didn't think I had anything left to give." Josie was quiet for a long moment. "But you did." He turned now, brows slightly drawn. "You gave me more than anyone ever did," she said. "You gave me back myself." Calder's voice was low. "You saved yourself, Josie. I just left the door open." Her throat tightened. She looked away. "Well, I think I'm ready to walk through that door now. If you'll let me." He froze. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand in his. Calloused, warm, sure. "I've been waiting," he said simply. "Just didn't want to rush you." She smiled. Not shyly, not nervously, but as a woman choosing love, not stumbling into it. They didn't call it courting. It wasn't stolen glances or fluttery words. It was chores done side by side, notes left in boots, holding hands at dusk while the girls laughed indoors. It was love that grew where healing had already made a home. In spring, they planted wildflowers in the yard. Calder joked he'd rather plant beans. Josie laughed and threw a petal at him. He caught it, kept it, and later that night, placed it between the pages of the old journal where he recorded every girl's name who passed through the Dollar House. Right beside the first entry, "Josie found in my barn, price tag $1, value infinite." Spring brought more than wildflowers. It brought letters, rumors, warnings. Whispers of Gideon Rusk resurfaced. One of the men Josie had only heard spoken of in passing back when she was being transported like cargo. A shadowy figure, always just behind the curtain, pulling strings and pocketing gold. And now he was back in Montana. Miriam handed Calder a telegram one morning while Josie was in town with 2 of the girls. Rusk sighted in North Pass, asking questions about the Dollar House. Travel light. Calder read it 3 times before folding it tightly and sliding it into his coat. That evening, he didn't say anything about it at first. He just stood by the fence, watching Josie help Ruth and Clara string up laundry between 2 old pine posts. She looked peaceful, confident, alive. And all he could think was, Not again. He approached her quietly. We need to talk. In the kitchen, away from the others, Calder handed her the note. Josie read it without a word, her jaw stiffening. I remember that name, she finally said. He paid Shaw, paid all of them. And he was the one they were scared of. You think he's looking for revenge? Calder asked. No, she whispered. I think he's looking for control. He knows we're undoing everything he built. Calder's voice was calm but steel-laced. Then he's going to find the door shut. The next day, they held a meeting with Miriam, Reuben, and 2 neighboring ranchers who had quietly supported the Dollar House since the beginning. It wasn't a town hall. It was a war room. If Rusk comes near this place, Calder said, we stand between him and the girls. Josie didn't speak for a moment. Then she stood. I don't want to run. Not again. But I won't let these girls carry what I carried. If it means testifying, traveling, telling everything, I will. Calder placed a hand on her shoulder. We do it together. That night, Josie couldn't sleep. She stood in the doorway of her room, watching the hallway, lantern light flickering gently, the sound of soft breathing from the rooms around her. She used to be one of them, a girl with no name, no voice. Now she was the one they whispered to when nightmares came, the one they looked for at dawn, and she wouldn't let fear steal that. She padded downstairs, where Calder sat by the fireplace, still awake. He looked up as she entered. Without a word, she sat beside him and took his hand. Then she said, if we survive this, I want to marry you. Calder blinked. I'm not saying it because I'm scared, she continued. I'm saying it because I've never been more sure of who I am, and part of who I am is with you. Calder reached over, thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. We'll survive it, he whispered, and I'd be honored. Outside, the wind picked up, and the past, which once hunted her, would soon find out Josie Boone wasn't prey anymore. Gideon Rusk arrived in Elmswood under the name Mr. Granger. He wore a fine suit, polished boots, and spoke with the clipped confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Most wouldn't have looked twice. To the average townsperson, he was just another man of means. But Miriam recognized him the moment he stepped into her boarding house, pretending to inquire about charitable opportunities. She served him tea, and then sent a rider straight to the Dollar House. That evening, Calder read her note aloud in the kitchen, voice like stone. He's here, name's fake, smiles real, watching. Josie didn't blink. We make the first move, she said, before he tries to charm the mayor or bribe the sheriff. Ellis, the older rancher from the southern boundary, spoke from his corner chair. How far you want to go, Josie? She didn't hesitate. All the way, we bring him into the light. They crafted a plan. Josie would face him, not as bait, but as proof. She had her own words now, her own spine, and this time Calder wouldn't be watching from a distance. He'd be right behind her. They found Rusk seated in the back of the saloon 2 nights later, sipping whiskey like it was his birthright. Josie stepped in first. Rusk looked up, and for just a flicker, the mask cracked. He knew her, knew exactly who she was. Well, he drawled, the runaway with the fire in her eyes. Calder came in behind her, quiet as a storm. Josie didn't flinch. You don't get to pretend you're a gentleman. Sweetheart, I made you valuable. No, she said calmly. I made myself priceless. She pulled a folded letter from her coat pocket and laid it on the table between them. Official. Signed by a federal judge. Authorization for immediate arrest upon corroborated testimony. Rusk raised one brow. You planning on reciting fairy tales in court? Josie leaned closer. I'm planning on naming every girl, every town, every route, and every man who did nothing. Rusk laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then Calder laid his badge on the table, a temporary appointment from Sheriff Ballard, giving him authority until the federal marshal arrived. Try running, Calder said. See how far you get. Rusk stood, fixing his cuffs. I'll be gone before sunrise. You won't be gone before dawn, said a voice from behind the bar. It was Miriam holding a shotgun. Rusk froze, then slowly sat back down. By morning, he was in custody, and for the first time in a long time, Josie exhaled, not with relief, but with finality. That afternoon, she sat beneath the tree behind the Dollar House, while the girls braided one another's hair and sang old folk songs. Calder sat beside her. You did it, he said. She shook her head. We did. He looked at her with something soft and certain. You still want to marry me? She turned, eyes bright, more than anything, and in the golden light of early spring, with the scent of honeysuckle and hope in the air, Calder and Josie promised each other forever, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals, as fire meeting steadiness, as 2 souls who had every reason to give up, but chose to build something beautiful instead. The wedding was simple. No choir, No polished boots, no lace flown in from the east. Just sunlight, wildflowers, and the scent of warm bread floating from Miriam's kitchen. Josie wore a soft cream-colored dress that Clara and Ruth had helped sew. It wasn't extravagant, but it fit her like it had waited its whole life to be worn. Calder stood in his best black coat, cleaned up and steady as ever, his silver-streaked hair combed back for the first time anyone could remember. They stood beneath the cottonwood tree behind the dollar house, the very one Josie had planted her dreams under not long ago. Now it bore witness to a promise made between two people who had known loss and chose love anyway. Reuben officiated. His voice trembled when he began, but steadied as he spoke. You found each other in a broken world. You could have walked away, but you stayed. You built something that will outlast every storm. The girls stood in rows, holding flowers picked from the hillside. They whispered among themselves and cried quietly, some out of happiness, others because this was the first wedding they had seen where love looked like safety. When Reuben asked Calder if he took Josie as his wife, he said, I've taken care of a lot of things in my life. Horses, land, folks passing through, but I've never wanted to keep anything until her. And when he asked Josie the same, she replied, I spent half my life being told I didn't belong to myself, and now I give myself fully, freely, to the man who gave me back my name. They kissed to the sound of applause and wind in the trees. No band, no banquet, but joy filled the valley like thunder. Later, Calder and Josie danced on the porch under lantern light, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses. The girls joined in, spinning barefoot in the grass, giggling like they didn't know they were part of something sacred. Miriam watched from a rocking chair, mist in her eyes. Look at them, she whispered. It's not just a wedding, it's a rebirth. That night, Josie and Calder sat on the porch alone for a moment. The stars stretched out above them like a quiet hymn. I never thought I'd belong anywhere, Josie said softly. Calder reached over and laced his fingers with hers. You don't just belong here, he said. You built here. You are here. She rested her head on his shoulder. And they sat like that for a long time. No need for more words. The fire had been survived, the house had been built, and the girl who once cost $1 now led a home that could never be bought. Summer settled gently over the valley. Life at the dollar house continued, not as a miracle anymore, but as a rhythm. Wake at dawn, feed the animals, tend the garden, welcome whoever arrived at the gate. Calder and Josie worked like they'd always belonged together, because in every way that mattered, they did. He handled the land, she handled the girls, and between the two of them, no one fell through the cracks. But peace has a way of being tested. One morning a wagon rolled into the yard, bigger than most, clean, professional-looking. Two women stepped out dressed in Eastern fashion, hats pinned, skirts crisp. They introduced themselves as representatives of the Northern Women's Welfare Society, and they were just passing through on a survey. Calder watched them with narrowed eyes. Josie greeted them with polite firmness. The taller one, Miss Grayson, glanced at the house and asked, Do you have any formal oversight? We have food, beds, school books, and safety, Josie replied. Is that not formal enough? The second woman, Miss Lyle, made a note in her ledger. You're operating without government structure. That might make some nervous. Josie didn't smile. We're not a charity. We're a family. If that makes people nervous, maybe they should ask why. The women left without incident, but the air afterward felt tense. That evening, Calder sat with Josie on the back porch, polishing the worn handle of his father's old rifle. You think they'll stir up trouble? He asked. Josie nodded. Eventually. Not all enemies come with ropes or knives. Some come with ink and rules. He looked at her. We'll fight them too. You know that, right? She leaned into his side. I don't doubt it, but I don't want to spend my life fighting. He squeezed her hand gently. Then let's spend it building, and we'll deal with whatever comes. Later that week, two more girls arrived. Sisters, 10 and 13. No parents, no papers, no explanation other than eyes filled with fear and a single line scribbled in charcoal on the younger one's wrist. Ask for Josie. Josie knelt beside them, tears pressing behind her smile. They stayed. The dollar house grew again. 2 more beds built, another chicken coop repaired, a reading corner expanded with books Calder picked up from a traveling salesman who didn't charge when he heard what the house was for. The whole county began to change, quietly, beautifully. People stopped whispering. They started donating. Some even started asking how to build something like it in their own towns. And just like that, the legacy began to stretch beyond the fences. One evening, Josie stood under the cottonwood tree where she'd said her vows and looked out across the porch full of laughter. She turned to Calder, who was watching the stars. You know what the best part is? She asked. He smiled. What? That I don't feel like someone you saved anymore. He looked at her, heart wide open. You're not. Josie took a breath. I feel like someone who helped save you back. And with the wind weaving through the grass and the sound of healing all around them, they both knew it was true. The letter came in early fall. Stamped with an embossed seal and signed by a state official, it read, To the Dollar House. You are hereby summoned to appear before the Territorial Oversight Committee in Helena. Concerns have been raised about your operations, funding, and the legality of housing minors without formal state supervision. Josie stared at it in silence, not with fear, with fury. That night, she and Calder sat at the kitchen table long after the girls had gone to bed. We knew this could come, Calder said. They don't like what they can't control. Josie nodded slowly. They're trying to paint us as dangerous, like we're hiding something. You want to fight this? Josie looked him dead in the eye. I want to walk into that courthouse with a list of every girl we've saved and ask them one question. Would you rather I hadn't? Preparations began immediately. Reuben rode ahead to Helena to meet with a friendly judge. Miriam gathered testimonies from townsfolk across the region. The older girls at the Dollar House, Ruth, Clara, Naomi, offered to come and speak, their hands trembling, their voices strong. And Calder? He built a new wooden sign to hang on the porch while they were gone. Carved into it, worth more than paper says. The day they left for Helena, the entire town came to see them off. It wasn't a trial, not legally, but everyone knew it felt like one. Josie wore a plain blue dress. Her hands were ink-stained from the names she'd been writing out in a small notebook. Girls who came through the door, what they arrived with, and where they were now. The wagon rolled out slowly, passing the cottonwood tree, the garden, the porch full of laughter. Josie turned to Calder as the house grew small behind them. Do you think they'll listen? He nodded. They'll listen. She raised a brow. Because of truth? He smiled gently. Because you're the one speaking it. Helena was colder than expected. The committee chamber felt like something from another world. Polished wood, stone-faced men behind high desks, women scribbling notes without looking up. Josie stood when called. She did not shake. She did not stammer. She opened her notebook, placed it on the podium, and began. My name is Josie Boone. I was found in a barn with a price tag around my neck. Since then, I've helped over 60 girls find safety, a bed, a name, and a life they never believed they'd have. She read names, stories, moments, then paused. If you think this place needs to be registered, fine. If it needs oversight, let's talk. But don't pretend what we're doing is dangerous. The only danger these girls faced was the world before they walked through our door. Silence. Then unexpectedly, one of the committee women, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, leaned forward. I know one of those girls. You gave her back to us. Her voice cracked. And just like that, the tide turned. By evening, the committee declared the Dollar House fully protected under a new provision. Independent community safe homes. More would be encouraged, supported. And Josie Boone would be listed by name as its model. That night, Calder and Josie stood under the stars outside the boarding house in Helena. He looked at her like the day they first met. Quietly, steadily, in awe. You didn't just change my life, he said softly. You changed everything around you. Josie reached for his hand. No, she whispered. We did. Years passed, but the Dollar House never dimmed. Its walls changed, repainted, repaired, rebuilt, but the heart of it remained the same. A porch that stayed lit through the darkest storms. A bed that waited without judgment. A woman at the door who knew exactly how it felt to arrive broken. Josie Boone became more than a name. She became a whisper of hope on every dusty trail, in every whispered story traded between girls on train platforms and wagons. If you find the Dollar House, you'll be safe. Some came alone. Some came with children. Some came not knowing their names. Only that there was a place where they might find them again. And they did. Calder grew older, but his strength never faded. He taught the younger ranchers how to mend tack and train nervous horses. He built rocking chairs and dug fence posts until his hands stiffened in winter. And every morning he brewed Josie her tea just the way she liked it. Strong, no sugar. They grew into their love like they grew into the land. Steady, rooted, weatherproof. One spring, a girl named Evie arrived. Quiet, sharp-eyed, and half feral from running too long. Josie sat with her under the cottonwood tree, just as Calder once sat with her. Evie didn't speak for days, until one night she crept into Josie's room, holding a torn scrap of paper. On it was written, "Am I still worth anything?" Josie knelt beside her, took the girl's hands in hers, and whispered, "You were worth everything before you even got here. And now that you are here, you'll never be alone again." The Dollar House became a model across the region, with 3 others opening in different towns. Josie never sought fame. But letters kept arriving. Thank yous, invitations, prayers. One letter came from the capital. It informed her she'd been nominated for the Governor's Medal of Civil Honor. She accepted quietly, and then returned home to bake bread with Ruth for the new arrivals. On a soft June evening, Josie and Calder sat on the porch, hand in hand, watching a new batch of girls chase fireflies in the yard. Josie leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she asked. Calder didn't need to think. "They'll remember what you gave them, what no one else did." She smiled, eyes wet. "Love?" He turned toward her. "Freedom. Years from now, when people would pass by the house with the carved sign, 'Worth more than paper says,' they wouldn't just see a building. They'd feel something, a presence, a warmth, a legacy of a man who offered a barn instead of a cell, and of a girl with a price tag around her neck who turned that shame into sanctuary and that barn into a beacon."